Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are finally doing this video. We are finally reviewing the figure here today in this video, the giant Shimo. Very excited to get into it. I hope she's gonna be just as good as the other giant figures we got for this movie. Before we take her out of the package, let's look at the package. So we have the Godzilla and Kong render down here. We have giant Shimo here, and we have the logos at the bottom. Up on top here, obviously the figure herself is covering it, but obviously it's just a movie logo, nothing too special there. Then we have the render on this side, giant Shimo on this side, and of course here is the back in which you can pause to read the text up here, which is just basically the movie synopsis. With the back of the packaging, they don't show you the list of the other figures. It's just a beautiful render and a cool font. Shimo has a pretty sick font here as well, I'm not gonna lie. Scar King had a pretty badass font, but Shimo here I think has a pretty cool font as a whole because it's like very frosty. I like that. Finally, at the bottom, just some other info, and of course, the list of the other three figures if you want to find them. Let's cut this box and take Shimo out. Let's do it. And here she is in her magnificent glory. Now, a common problem I notice when it comes to the bigger figures is that if Playmates has already done the smaller version of it, it's easily comparable for it being an easy cash grab because it's just an upsize. I was more hyped to get this Shimo than the 6-inch Shimo. Speaking of 6-inch Shimo, here she is. There is your comparison. Obviously, the Godzilla vs. Shimo is the same size as this, just with fancier colors. Ta-da! Here it is. There is quite a difference in terms of sizing. You can see in terms of colors, it's pretty much the same. You get the dark blue and the white color scheme. Articulation-wise, I will get to more of the giant figures articulation specifically, but pretty much the same as the regular one here. Head articulation, mouth articulation, tail articulation, and articulation in the legs. If anything, you're just gonna get similar playability in the scaling. Now, the biggest curfew when it comes to big figures, the giant figures, it's a common problem, and as we all know, it's called the curse of the screw holes. As you can see, regular Shimo here does not have the screw holes, and that's where I obviously think, apart from price, she stands much stronger here in the regular figure because there is no weird, awkward spots. You look around the entire figure, well, you can argue that you can see the screws at the neck, but it's barely noticeable, and they actually try to camouflage it with the colors. And then we have the giant figure here, where the screw holes are just obvious as daylight. You can see, literally looks like something punctured her, and it just looks so off. It just throws off the entire color scheme, and why can't they just conceal it? Or find a way to camouflage it? Yes, it's essential to have screws, especially for big figs like this, but I also think it's not that hard to just camouflage it or conceal it with some colors. So I mentioned that articulation is pretty much the same, right? What is it then? Let me show you it in action, starting off with the head. Down, up, you can see, she can bob her head up and down, you know, nodding or looking down at some humans because she is a lot bigger in terms of kaiju size. And then also you can move her head left and right, or you can move it all the way up, which is very cursed, but it's possible. You can do that. And it is great, but it is also a bit stiff. Maybe you need to like fiddle with it enough, and then eventually the joints will warm up. It'll be a lot easier. And then of course, you can open and close her jaw, just the under jaw piece. I thought this was gonna be one of those screws where you just screw it in and you just move it left and right. But they did what they did with the giant Godzilla for this movie and made it a ball socket as well. And more importantly, this took no effort to put on. There was no hair dryer needed to warm up the joints. That was a common issue of all the smaller figures, and looks like from, I don't remember if I had to do that for Godzilla, but I know for sure for this Shimos case, I didn't need to do that. I just had to use a little bit of force and push it in, and it was secured. Meaning that articulation is on all 180. Now, ball socket means you can also move the tail front and back a little bit, but it's not that big in terms of the range of it. So you can see, you can just move it side to side, but it's very limited, just that little bit. But most importantly, you can twist it. That's the important thing about it being on a ball socket. So there is great depths of articulation with the tail as well. And then of course, the final bit is the legs. All four of her legs can be moved back and forth. As you can see, technically if you wanted to stand up, like some of the smaller figures were advertised and packaged, you can do that. However, it does take a bit of structural integrity to make sure it does that. I probably won't waste my time doing that, but you get the idea. Open up the legs, close it up, and then of course you can move it forward and backwards. So the articulation is just like the smaller regular 6-inch one. And then of course you have swiveling at the feet. Very subtle and very firm swiveling, but it is possible, it's there. Also, might I mention, the feet are also softer plastic, which is great, so you don't scratch the figure that badly. There is good playability, and they've definitely rectified a lot of the things that the Godzilla vs. Kong giant figures were severely lacking. That was articulation. It would have been nice if the tail was a little bit longer, because obviously they have it on a curve like this, and the Godzilla tail was pretty long. So it would have been nice if the tail was a little bit longer, obviously to make it a little bit more accurate, but more importantly, if they can add a second socket in the middle, just like what they did with Mechagodzilla, we can have 2 points of articulation for the tail. That will be sick for great poses and other variety of articulation. You saw when I compared this with the smaller figures is that the color is very much the same. Blue and white, that is the color scheme. But what about texture? As you can see the scales pretty well, and she is basically an ice lizard, and she has, I guess, similar scaling as Godzilla, and so you can see the bumpiness, if you will. The tail, this is not that bad of a problem. This was a main complaint I had for a lot of the Godzillas, and I guess, I don't think Shimo had that issue, but I guess this one has that awkward cutoff point where the colors were going to be consistent. As you can see for the tail, it's a very light fading blue, and it goes all the way to the tip, and it's very half and half, as you can see, because when you look at the bottom of the tail, yes, the base of it is white, but then you can also see it fades to blue eventually at the bottom here. So it's a good mix here. I think this is fine. There's still shades of white here at the end, so it's not that big of a problem. And when you get to the top of the tail, again, it's all like fades of blue once again, going to the tip of her tail to more a solid blue color. The awkward cutoff point, you can see, is just white, and then it continues on her dorsal plates of this dark blue color scheme. And one thing I did notice was that for the regular figure, the neck dorsal plates were still white, but for the giant one here, they were painted dark blue. So there you go, a little bit of a difference there. And then you get to her crown or forehead here. It's also white, but then also it transitions into the transparent blue for, I guess, the crown, as I like to call it. It's also soft plastic here, but the color is very simple and they contrast each other very well. And of course, on her head, you got the blue eyes. It does look a little bit cartoony, but it is also accurate. Yellow teeth, pink tongue. It's a good simplistic color scheme, because if there's too many colors, it can get quite messy. So it's good for a $40 children's toy. Keep that in mind. Now, one thing I would say, because in the movie, they've shown shots of her feet. Literally one of the first shots of Shimo when she's introduced in that lava cave was she steps out and the first thing you see is her feet. And what do you notice? her claws are actually dark blue. And unfortunately for the toys here, and I'm looking at all the other Shimos Playmates has done, all of the Shimos, including this one, have white claws. That's not to say it's a bad thing, but if you wanted to be a little bit more nitpicky and make it movie accurate, then yes, this is wrong. The claws are meant to be blue as well. If you're gonna want a lore accurate Shimo, you're gonna have to wait for the Haya Toys Shimo or the SH Monster Arts one. The scaling is definitely off. That's without a question. These are supposedly 11 inches. I can tell you right now, that's not the case. Unfortunately, in this case, they made Godzilla look way bigger than Shimo, which is quite the opposite in the movie. And keep in mind, these were all the same prices. It does feel like Godzilla is worth a little more for the 40 bucks because of his size. And I mentioned he has a longer tail, and that was something I wish Shimo had. Look at that. Look at the tail difference. Godzilla's tail is so long that it's like basically not in frame. The end of it is out of frame. And Shimo's here is just a curve and it's too short. It's too short. The tail needed to be longer. If they can give Godzilla such a long tail here, and then comparing her with Kong, if you know the ending, Kong literally looks bigger than her, which is obviously not true. And Kong isn't even in shot, I just realized. There you go. And that's your best comparison, as you can see. So again, not accurate whatsoever. Okay, well, what about Scar King, the ape who enslaved her in the first place? Well, here he is, and as we all know, Scar King does ride Shimo in the movie. Yeah, this ain't gonna cut it. This ain't gonna cut it. It does look like Shimo is, again, like a dog, and Scar King is walking her. You can, technically use his whiplash as a leash. But he rides her in the movie, and that's because Shimo is very big in the movie, and she is supposed to be way bigger than Scar King, so that's why he could ride her. I'm not gonna even attempt it. I can tell you right now, it doesn't work here. It ain't accurate. Scaling is not accurate, and that is something you're going to expect with Playmates. Toys, not high-end collectible figures. These are toys. So it is unfortunate, but it's also cool to just put them side by side since they're technically in the same class of figures that Playmates is putting them in. So there you go. Comparison with Scar King. Now, if you somewhat want a scale comparison that is a little bit more accurate because you can't afford the Haya or SH Monster Art figures, well, this doesn't really work, but it's the best one you've got. The Battle Roar figures. They're 7 inches and it's still off. Obviously, Shimo is bigger than Godzilla, but not that big. If you remember the fight in Rio, there is a shot where Shimo is pushing Godzilla back and Godzilla is struggling. You can see that her head was almost as big as his torso, but this is obviously a little bit off. She looks way bigger than him here, but this is the best somewhat lore accurate comparison you're gonna get here. So, and then there's Kong. Again, not super accurate, but it's close enough. Scar King, who rides her. Does that work? Well, obviously, she's a bit big here, but yeah, there you go. I know the camera isn't picking it up, but there you go. It's affordable. 40 Canadian dollars. I got it with shipping too, so I'd say the money was there. It's worth it. For its size, it would have been nice to get the Frostbite Blast, but it would have probably upped the budget, so I can live with it. It is what it is. There are only a couple gripes I didn't like. Obviously, I've mentioned what they were already. So ultimately, my score for this giant Shimo is going to be an 8 out of 10. Don't go to eBay. Do not pay scalpers 5 times the original amount of money. As a whole toy, she is a good toy. And I think I've said that with the other giant figures. They have good playability on a giant scale, a bigger scale. And Shimo here joins that list and has the same benefits as well. So overall, I think it's a solid figure. So that is my review of the giant Shimo. It's about damn time I finally did this. And of course, I compared her with quite a lot of figures from the other stuff that Playmates has put out. So if you want to see the reviews for those, Obviously, they've been out, especially the other giant figures. So when you're done, click on the playlist that will show up in the end screen, or I have some links to the other reviews in the description and on the cards. For now, thank you so much for watching this review of the giant Shimo. Hit that like button if you did like it, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more, because I got more GXK figures and other products coming soon. We'll see you in the next one.